We are here to talk about cybersecurity. Now, this is something that is not necessarily going to go away. Threats are constantly out there, and obviously things are a lot more automated and connected, and with that comes risk. So the two gentlemen that are about to come up here and talk to you about sort of handling the cyber threat landscape out there are Travis Cherry and Matt Geary. Please give them a warm welcome, and hopefully they won't frighten you too much. Come on, guys.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to hang out with us and talk about security. I know this is not typical of the sessions that we've had here, but this is something that is, can you not hear me very well? Oh, is my mic not? All right, is that better at all? Okay, so we're talking about cybersecurity, and it's obviously a very important topic, as was mentioned, and something that I think everyone needs to care about. At Botkeeper, I'm CTO, and number one thing for me is always security. So above all else, the number one thing that I ask my teams to make sure that they do first is making sure that we're building secure software. So, yeah.
My name is Matt Geary. I'm the Senior Director of IT and Information Security at Botkeeper. Yay, Matt! All right, so this is going to be packed with content. I have my notes here to keep me on time, which the timer is not running. Oh. There we go. And so a bit of a purpose statement. Travis and I are going to give you a bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what goes into your information security and compliance programs, including evaluating your vendors and secure AI development. And we're going to give you some uncommon tips and tricks rather than change your password and make sure your employees are trained, which you should do, but you've probably heard that ad nauseum. So we hope by the end of this presentation, you're armed to be a more secure practice yourself and to advise your clients on how they can be more secure based on their business needs and their business model, and some interesting facts to give them as to why it matters and what the risks are. So, everyone excited? Yes. All right. How do I click the next?
The green button.
Oh, there we go. All right, $24 trillion a year. That is the scale of cybercrime globally. To put this in perspective, if cybercrime was a country, it would be the third largest country in the world. The first, US, second, China, cybercrime. The fourth largest country as far as GDP would be Japan or Germany at 4 trillion. So it's a lot of money. And this is only growing. So cybercrime is expected to grow from 2022 to 2027 by a staggering 182%. How has it gotten to this point? I call it the 4 horsemen of the cyber apocalypse. So you have the horsemen of doom, which is the fear-mongering. And maybe you've seen these in the headlines that cybercrime has gotten so bad that World War III would start off of a cyber attack. And it's true. NATO, there's a photo of their website that says Article 5 will be invoked on a significant cyber attack. So we will go to war. The horsemen of breach. So everyone is so fatigued about your data is already out there. Every other headline, 26 billion accounts stolen. Everyone's information's out, so why do I care? What's the point in protecting it? It's already out there, someone has it. The horsemen of sophistication. So we have this feeling that the bad guys are too advanced, there's always a gap, you can't secure the castle. It's not a if but when mentality is prevalent in the information security community. And then the horsemen of apocalypse, or the horsemen of resources. So we have this cavalier attitude that it's not going to happen to us. We're too small. Who would want my information? Our budgets are too tight. We don't have the right people on the bus. It could be anything along those lines. It's not a big risk for us. And then it happens. And suddenly, when you can't log in to pay your bills or pay your employees, and your production screeches to a halt. Then the culture shifts and things change. But don't just believe me. Here's the data. There are, in just one quarter alone in 2024, in the USA, 1,200 organizations were breached. That's an absurd number. And $24 trillion a year, you would expect absurd numbers. 60% of those organizations, after a significant breach, they closed up. 43% of attacks are aimed at small and medium-sized businesses. So if you say, hey, not me, under 100 employees, 43%. And there's a severe lack of professionals. So in the USA, there's 500,000 open positions. And in the information security community, we are clamoring for anyone with any degree. If you want to join, we will take you. It's dangerous, and some people like that. But 4 million jobs are open worldwide. So that leads us to our first poll. Now, big caveat here, you're not going to be admitting that you've had a breach. The question is, do you know of anyone personally, could also, personally, I'm going to leave vague, that you've had a security incident in the last year? Can you please raise your hand? Okay, what about 2 years? In the last 2 years, do you know of anyone? If you don't mind, again, you're not admitting anything. If you don't mind keeping your hand up so we can all just look around and you can get a sense of scale, it's real. It's happening, it's a reality. Thank you. Not just sensationalized headlines. So we went from the macro, we'll go down to the accounting industry. Working from the bottom up of this pyramid, the foundation is there's a lot of revealing and sensitive information in your companies. Not only that your company owns, but you're owning on behalf of clients. The middle layer here, building the pyramid, that's the amount of fraudulent schemes that can be committed with this information. You can change billing information. You can change the flow of money. And then at the capstone, the very top, you're inherently at a 30% higher risk for attacks. You know, you have the frenzy of tax season, you have urgency, you know, IRS deadlines. How many people have gotten IRS scam phish email? Send me money now. And stolen identities that you may not know they are stolen. And then narrow it down even further from finance, third-party risk. The gold standard of trending cyber risks is Verizon's data breach investigation report. In 2024, it showed a whopping 68% year-over-year increase on third-party risk. It's the biggest trend. And remember, each one of your vendors has vendors. So you have third-party risk, fourth-party risk, fifth-party risk, and it's an exponential threat. You could be breached by proxy. And do you know every indemnification clause of every vendor, of everyone you work with? It can get messy quick. And a real-world example here wasn't caused necessarily by a breach, but it's relevant for everybody. If you personally didn't use CrowdStrike and you went to an airport, you tried to get on a plane and you couldn't, well, no fault to you. It really underlines the importance of choose the right vendor, otherwise you may just have unforeseen consequences. At the end of the day, it's your data, it's your reputation, it's your brand. So, what do we do about it? We have a macro understanding of what's going on, trillions of dollars of damages, the amount of organizations being breached, the driving impacts behind accounting industry, and the most alarming trend being vendors and third-party risk. How do we stop the four horsemen? Can they be stopped? So we'll walk you through some do's and don'ts and some risk management. And this is going to be a lot of text. But on the do's side, I'll start there. Anyone like coupons? I like coupons. There is a ransomware discount code coupon you could use. to the bad guys. You could save $470,000 on average by involving law enforcement. This may seem like a no-brainer. You should go involve the law enforcement. But a lot of companies don't do that. They try to hide it under the rug, negotiate with the bad guys on their own time. And the bad guys, I'll talk about this later, they know what you're worth. And I'll go into that. The other thing to do, legally privilege your penetration tests. So what does this mean? It means you have known holes right now. Your team has known holes. You can't address everything, and there's going to be some gap when you know a hole to when you fix a hole. If you have that under attorney-client privilege, now in discovery, when you're sued after a breach, which you will be, you can say, you can't get that information. And then champion your information security team. So every time that inconvenient chat about two-factor authentication comes up, help your team out, help us nerds, and say, hey, this is really important, so we're not fighting about ourselves. And then on the don'ts, I've heard a lot of this as far as, I have cyber insurance, I'm okay. I have seen cyber insurance policies, which, by the way, I love cyber insurance. Not saying that, I'm just saying, just be careful. There's wild exclusions in some policies. For example, I've seen personally, after a social engineer, if your employee gets socially engineered, anything that happens after that point, you're not covered. Or if you lose a device, if it's considered a lost device, you're not covered. There's also other verbiage in there as far as a duty to defend. Do you have, now that lawsuits are becoming more personal, in your policy, is there a duty to defend your professional? And then also, hackers love to know that you're insured, so the moment you say, I have cyber insurance, that's also should be confidential information. They also want to know how much money your limits are, because then they know how much you're going to pay. Oh, you have a $5 million policy? I want $5 million. Another don't is let reasonable be the end of discussion. And the reason why we've seen, this is per IBM, $1 million more dollars on average when a data breach is disclosed by the attacker. Only 1 in 3 breaches were detected by an internal team. So reasonable right now is guiding us, and we're doing a really bad job at reasonable. And then the third don't here is think checking a compliance box means you're secure. So my little metaphor here is you could ride a motorcycle with just a helmet on, and you're compliant with the law, but that's no other protection on. That's probably not the most smart thing to do if you get in a crash. You'll want a jacket on and other protection. So going into how to build this and what's the way to stop the 4 horsemen? Well, we don't want you to be a statistic, so here's the basics, and you can build this out afterwards. Maybe you're already running this gauntlet, and maybe you're advising your clients currently on what they could be doing. Just like what we offer here at Botkeeper, when you consolidate your tech stack, you're the secure vendor for your clients. We're your secure vendor at Botkeeper. So if you boil this down to the just bare essentials, you have assets. So you have people, hardware, data, intellectual property. You have policies. So technical controls, administrative controls, procedures driven by your policies. You have physical security. And then you document and track against your assets and your policies. You monitor them, you audit them, and if they're aligned, great, continually improve. If they're not aligned, then perform an incident response, a lessons learned, and then continually improve. So let's give you some examples. There's a lot of text as well. We weren't going to put the brand logos here, but for assets, you'll want to start with a unified endpoint management. A lot of lingo here, sorry. Unified endpoint management system, we use at Botkeeper ConnectWise. It's a system basically to monitor, it's a remote monitoring system, and you can control your assets through that. And then an EDR, what is an EDR? It's just a new term for antivirus. Antivirus, the word has been completely destroyed now. The way it works is not great. Very easy to get around an antivirus. So EDR uses behavior analytics as a context for antivirus. We use SentinelOne at Botkeeper. And then you'll have an identity provider such as Okta, what we use, and you'll have a secure cloud broker that is getting you into all your cloud assets. Then you have your policies. So you'll want to start with a governance, risk, and compliance tool. We use Drata. There's others out there, many others. And you'll track your evidence of how you are performing your policies, your compliance, your frameworks, and then you'll go into the monitoring stage here, an auditing stage. So you pipe all that information into some sort of log analysis system. We use Elastic. There's, again, many others. And then you respond and recover based on these things. So you use, ideally, an information security professional or an outside company as a larger strategy to do these things. And then going into what was mentioned before, incident response. This is where the biggest fines and penalties are coming, including legislation and jail time, is how companies are handling and communicating what happened. Some takeaways you'll want to maybe bring to your team is, okay, great, we have an incident response plan. Well, do you have how you're tracking your reimbursement on your insurance claim? How do you track your employees' time? How is that going to be from their day-to-day job? And do you want to use your internal employees, or do you want to have everything external through your insurance? Again, for reimbursement, because it could be years before you see that $5 million payment that the bad guys wanted. And then who are you calling first? Are you calling law enforcement, cyber insurance, your attorney? Who gets called first matters, because again, you're going to be sued. And hint, hint, nudge, nudge, not telling you what to do, but again, attorney-client privilege really matters here. We saw some big cases with triple-digit $1 million where if they did a correct path on incident response, they would save triple-digit $1 million. Also, do not say the word breach internally. The word breach is a legal term. So use the word incident and only allow management to say the word breach if it's approved, including externally. It's internal and external because it's all going to be discovered. And then do you have an out-of-bands communication set up? So what that means is if your Slack or your Teams was breached, how are you going to communicate? And if the bad guy didn't necessarily shut them down, but he's reading all your messages. So now he knows what you're doing. So out of band means something that's like I wouldn't advise SMS, but just if you just think about it that way, it's a separate system that's not part of the network, and you use that to communicate in the event of an incident response. Microsoft did come out with an advisory which said it is very inconvenient to do. And then how are you simulating weeks and months in your tabletops? A lot of times we do a tabletop, an incident response tabletop, where we schedule 2 or 3 hours with the executive team, with the managers, and then that's it. But you don't go through the gamut of weeks and months. You could not know what actually happened in a forensics a week later. So how are you simulating that? And I think that's Now to Travis, I'm handing off to Travis to talk about infrastructure and AI.
I'll trade spots with you. All right, so since we're at an AI conference, we obviously need to talk about AI security. So if you guys think back a couple of years, or not even a couple of years, what, maybe 18 months, maybe 20 months, when ChatGPT first rolled out, a lot of people were just going and using it in ways that was not ideal. So there's a lot that you need to think about from an AI security perspective, but this is one of the first places to start. So as you look kind of internally within your firm, how are your employees using these tools? They can easily go in there and put confidential client information, ask questions, ask it to summarize things. But if they're not doing this in a secure way, it's possible that the data that they're feeding into that can actually end up being retrained into those models and someone else can discover it. This actually happened at Samsung. Massive amounts of proprietary company data were fed into one of those tools and were surfaced to folks outside of the company. So pretty embarrassing, but something that's very preventable. So what I would advise is, educating your team and saying, hey, we want you to be able to leverage these tools because they do make you more efficient. We're not just going to ban them and block every one of these sites, but empower them to use one that you have approved, right? You've vetted and done your due diligence. Make sure that you have the appropriate tier of that tool that isn't going to be retraining on the data that you're feeding it. Another thing to consider is that within the terms of use of these solutions, they're trying to suggest that whatever content is generated from it, you own, right? So like if you go and create some text or if you go and create an image, that's yours. However, there's ways that you can still end up in legal trouble with this. So imagine if somebody were to go in and generate an image of Kal Penn eating at McDonald's. His legal team might have a problem with that. And we all also know that Kal Penn is probably eating at White Castle, not McDonald's. But obviously you have to be careful with what kind of information you're feeding into it and what you're trying to get out. So when you actually get into building software, one of the tools you guys have probably heard, developers are going to be not needed anymore because AI can just generate all the code. I would say that's a bit of a reach, and it's going to help developers. It's going to make them a lot faster. But when we use these tool sets and that code that's generated out of it, one of the most interesting things is that the majority of that code is actually riddled with security vulnerabilities. And they've done studies on this to prove it, right? So people sometimes are just blindly using that, saying, hey, it generated it for me, it must be good, so I'm going to go ahead and just ship it. So obviously we have to be really careful about how we're using that code. But then, again, kind of back to the licensing challenges, the code that is being generated could be based off of some code that was found in the wild, just as these other tools are maybe using copyrighted works, right, to generate text. It could be code that is commercially licensed or open source licensed in such a way that it would require your code to be open source as well. So you have to be really careful to make sure if you're using one of those tools that it is only sourcing code that is okay to use. And then as you start thinking about a lot of what everyone's doing is, hey, we've got a chat bot. Right? We've made a cool chatbot and we prompted it and we told it like all that you can answer is about this one client and you can only answer accounting questions. But there's this notion of escaping the matrix, where essentially someone can basically get out of that pre-prompted scenario and then start to discern other information. They could drill down to potentially data that you don't want them to see, or you have to make sure that it's impossible for them to get out of, only the data that they should be able to see in there. And there's definitely cases where people are reckless with this and make assumptions, right? So you need to make sure that it's physically impossible to get out of that context, especially from a data security perspective. So ultimately, just both internally with your team, make sure that you have a strategy, make sure that you have some sort of a policy, if you don't already, for how you're using it. And then as you're working with vendors, make sure that you understand how are the vendors using AI. Because there's a lot of new vendors that are spinning up, that are these Y Combinator-backed vendors that are just taking your data and just throwing it in an LLM, and potentially a really insecure way. So you want to make sure that you understand, how these folks are using these tools and that they're doing it really securely. So I think it's back to Matt. Yeah. Oh yeah. So next poll question. Who here within your firm has already rolled out some form of an AI policy?
Wow.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad it's on your to-do list. I would definitely, you can find templates for these online. They're pretty straightforward, but it's just something that, education is huge here, and obviously having those conversations with your leadership team, agreeing on the tools, and having a strategy, right? So just definitely drill into that if you can. I think it will definitely be worth doing.
That's very surprising. Please create an AI policy. That's a good policy, fine. You could just deploy it out. You could have lots of intellectual property being leaked right now. A lot of people don't understand that if you go put that Excel sheet and your Copilot and whatever else you're using, or ChatGPT, make me this table and do all my graphs for me. It's great. But now all that information is now gone to the nether. And that's what Travis was saying with Samsung. So please go make a policy. Even if the policy is don't use it right now until we mature. All right, SOC 2. Some tips you may want to know. You are all probably experts, so if something you learned here, that would be amazing. Otherwise, nothing earth-shattering. But the SOC 2, it's not a contract. That's one that I've seen personally. People think, oh, the SOC 2, this vendor has it, and therefore they're all good. And again, I'm not disparaging SOC 2. SOC 2 is great. I'm just saying be careful. It's also full of opinions, and that's very uncomfortable for some people in the information security community, because auditors' language is a very interesting thing. Auditors will not say right off one sentence. It's going to be 6 sentences, and it's going to be very exact. So you need to have your own list of expectations for your vendors. And then a SOC 2, you reconcile that against your expectations. That's how it should be used. Right now, we just check the compliance box, we ride the motorcycle with a helmet. The SOC 2 is also highly targeted to a target audience. So you actually need to be a qualified individual to read a SOC 2 per the SOC 2. So if you don't understand the report, it is not for you. And that can get you in a lot of trouble when you're trying to evaluate your vendor. And the SOC 2 is only for service. A lot of people don't know that as well, is that if you have a software that's on-prem, or a server that's on-prem, or anything else that is a good, not a service, you need to ask for the SOC for supply chain. So you'll need the SOC 2 and the SOC for supply chain. And then in the world of international and remote work, the SOC 2 has nothing to do with geography. The ISO 27001 does. So if you aren't sure your vendors and their controls, how they're being tested for remote users in offshoring capacities, go back to your list of expectations. And again, they don't have to be crazy. You can start off with just, hey, if you have our data, I need to make sure any employee that sees this sensitive data is located here. You may be doing some of that, but again, going to our poll here, do you regularly perform SOC 2 reports constantly, like after the initial review, or do you just onboard your vendor, do it the one time, which is, understandable. There's a lot of work to be done, but here's a poll. Do you regularly perform it just once or multiple times? If you do it just the once, if you can raise your hand. Just the once? Okay. So you are regularly, then that's great. So that would be something, on the next one, you'd say, hey, is my data still, here's my expectations. Is it still matching? And then that's it for me. Hand it back to Travis.
Cool. So we wanted to give you guys a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look on what goes into securing software. So, writing secure code, securing infrastructure, things like that. I know this is going to get a little into the weeds, so I apologize in advance, but I think it's important for you to kind of have an understanding of what goes into this, so that as you are analyzing vendors, right, that you're working with, you can do really thorough due diligence, because believe me, we get security questionnaires that are miles long, and they ask really nitty-gritty questions about this stuff. So I think it's important that you're understanding, how is your data being secured? Are you following these kinds of best practices that we're going to be highlighting here? So where I wanted to start is with the OWASP top 10. This is basically the top 10 kind of web application security risks. So these are the types of things that hackers do, broken into different categories. And these categories are managed by this organization called OWASP. They evolve over time, and they're basically curating these things derived from the actual landscape, right? Like what kind of breaches are happening, which ones are most common, which ones are most impactful. I am going to spare you. I'm not going to go into all 10 of these in detail. I just want to highlight one or two that I think are particularly kind of interesting from a case study perspective. So the first one is a thing called injection. So injection can manifest in a couple of different ways, but the idea here is that let's say that you have an application where you can comment back and forth with your clients. So what a hacker could do is they could go in the comment field, and instead of just typing text, they could actually type in essentially JavaScript code, which is the code that runs in a web browser. And when that comment is rendered on the page, either for you, again, when you come back, or for your client, instead of it just rendering the code as text, it could actually execute that code if it's not secured properly. And what that could do then is allow a hacker to get their cookie, so then they could take over their session, they could steal their data, they could redirect them somewhere else. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. So this is something that it's been a thing for decades, right? It's a very common exploit. It still happens though. And internally, we have a quality assurance team that is testing our applications every day. And we give them, example payloads of like, if you go put this in the comment box, if we were vulnerable to that, you would see a little alert, right? So we're making sure that everywhere you can do this in our application, we're testing for it. And I'll get into this later, but there's other ways to mitigate against this, but this one is a very common one, but it's again, very preventable. You can also see injection on the other side of the fence. So the way that web applications work is, let's say you have the piece that you see in the browser that you're interacting with. So let's say we have a form that you can create a client, and you're putting in their name and their industry, and then you hit submit. There's an API that is on a server somewhere that's talking to a database. So the data that you filled in the form is basically being inserted into a database through a database query. And the values that you put in, like their name and things like that, are substituted into that query. So that query runs on the database, and it's doing what's called an insert, right? It's inserting a record into the database. But it's possible that a hacker, when they're putting in the name of something, they could actually put in what would look like, okay, that insert database query, that's done. And now I've got another database query where I'm going to delete your entire database, or I'm going to return some other data. And this is not uncommon, and it's something that is a pretty massive and disastrous exploit. So again, these are things we know about. Our teams, when they're building code, they need to know how to secure against these things, and we need to have pen tests done, which is, essentially we have a third party that comes in and tries to hack us to make sure that this stuff isn't exploitable. Another really big area that's probably one of the most common sources of problems is vulnerable and outdated components. So what this means is when you're building software, it's running on a server. That server has an operating system, just like Windows. And if you're not running Windows Update every so often, you probably see it patched, X number of security problems. But if you let that go for a couple of years, those security things are known in these hacker communities, and they write these little bots that basically just go searching in the internet, trying to find things that are deployed still that haven't been patched, and they know that they can exploit them. And this happens constantly. So how can we actually build software to protect against these things? One of the biggest things that you want to look for is using trusted tools and frameworks. So for example, when you're building your identity and access management, and what this means is like, I'm setting up my user account. I've got my username, my password, I want to enroll in multi-factor authentication. You don't want to home bake that. We don't need to be storing passwords. There are companies, I'm not going to name names, but there are companies that have been in recent lawsuits where they stored their own passwords in clear text. You should always store passwords encrypted, so if anybody ever got that data, they couldn't just take that password and go log in with your account, right? And someone internally couldn't see it. But that's just silly, right? Like these things are best practices. It shouldn't happen. So you should use an off-the-shelf, well-known vendor solution for this. We use AWS or Amazon Web Services Cognito. And this, it's a very sophisticated solution. It's well-maintained. It has all sorts of really cool stuff where like, if you go log in from here and 2 hours later you're on the other side of the world, it's like, nope, that's not cool. Another thing is to make sure that you're leveraging a trusted way to get data. So in Botkeeper's case, when we are getting data from your banks, we do not store your bank credentials. You don't want us to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want that liability. We work with a MasterCard-owned company that has a very secure mechanism for doing this, and they have a secure way for integrating with those banks. So it's always better to lean on solutions that are built, purpose-built for these things. They've got hundreds of people. They've got an army of people that's all they do. And then you also want to make sure that the tools that you're working with are like validated integrations. So, this is the same example of like, if I want to go install something on my laptop, go get it from the Mac store and don't sideload some shady stuff that you have no idea what's going to happen. Or, if there's malware baked into it. And, same in the accounting space. If you're going to use an integration, so Botkeeper has to have, we're in the marketplaces for both QBO and Xero. And in order for us to be able to connect, to your GLs, we have to go through a rigorous compliance review process every year with them to make sure that, we're adhering their kind of data integrity and data security standards. And then lastly over here, just using mature frameworks when you're building code, right? So like when we go and write code, there's tools that we use, these libraries, because again, with all of this, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. People have done these things over and over again and built so much protection in them that you could never replicate doing it yourself. And there are frameworks out there that will completely prevent cross-site scripting, which is that comment example that I gave, or the SQL injection example of being able to get data out of your database. So just again, kind of secure by design stuff. Make sure when you're working with a tool, can they support single sign-on? Because if so, this is going to save you the work and potentially the risk of, let's say, I've got Botkeeper and 10 other vendor solutions, and when I have an employee come and go from my firm, now I have to go and remember to add or remove them from every one of those systems when they leave. What if I forget to do that? Now that person could potentially still go log into that system. Happens all the time. If you're using single sign-on or we support SAML, that just automatically happens, right? Like they're going through your Okta or your Azure Active Directory. Once you deactivate them there, they lose access to all these other tools. Make sure that whatever solutions you use, they have like fine-grained user access to where you can provision them. Are they an administrator? Are they just an operations user? And then you could also provision them to specifically, the clients or the entities that they need to support within that platform. So in our case, we don't necessarily want you to have to bring in, if you have a team of 10 accountants and they're each supporting 10 clients, you don't want to have to give each accountant access to all 100 of your clients. You want to be able to just give them access to the clients they support. And then lastly here, there's just kind of basic stuff that you would expect, but you want to make sure that people are doing training of their employees. Education is huge. Making sure that your development team is doing some sort of annual secure coding training. Making sure that your employees are enrolled in phishing training, right? And you're constantly reminding people of these risks and that they're on their game. So I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this one either, but the idea of what I'm trying to showcase here is that when you take code, as a development team that's writing software, from the person who wrote the software to shipping it live, right, to where you're actually interacting with it and it's, working with real data, how can you basically prevent security issues from making their way into that live environment? So we have a very, very rigorous process that happens, and it's this concept called shifting left, where essentially as close to the point where we're writing the code, we want to be able to detect and eliminate all of these things. So what we're doing is we have these automated, it's called a pipeline, but it's essentially something that every time an engineer says, hey, I wrote some code, now I want to get this into production. There's a review process where a human just has to look at it and make sure, like, does this look okay? Are there any bugs, any security issues, things like that? But then we go in and check and make sure that all of the libraries that they're using aren't outdated. They don't have any known vulnerabilities with them, and that happens automatically. And these things pop up all the time. And then we're looking to see somewhere in the code, did someone inadvertently leave in a password or an API key or something somewhere? because that does, again, happen all the time, and it can be a massive risk. But we have automated tools that can identify those things and prevent them from making it live. There's also tools that can actually look at your code and find what looks like insecure code and highlight it to you and say, hey, this looks sketchy. You should probably rewrite this. And then something really cool that we do is traditionally, in order for you to be able to run what's called a dynamic application security test. So the idea here is it's essentially simulating what a hacker would do and just trying to hack your code, running all these scans against it and looking to see if it can get in. So what you can do is, instead of waiting to do that in production, we actually spin up what we call ephemeral environments. So what this is we take that application and we run it in an internal kind of quarantine sandbox and run this test against it, and then we throw that thing away. So that way we can find all of this stuff before it ever sees the light of day.
These are all really good questions to ask your vendors, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, again,
SOC 2.
this is why we're going through this, is we want you guys to have an appreciation for how this stuff should be built and to hold your vendors to that high standard. So on the infrastructure side, there's a lot here. This is not an exhaustive list, but there's a lot of things that you want to consider, with how is your infrastructure secured, to make sure that, not only at the application level, right, like the code that I wrote is secure, but the way that you're accessing it is also providing some additional securities. So just kind of taking a look back in the past, the way that things used to work is that somebody had a data center somewhere, or maybe it was in the building, and they would take a server, like a physical computer, and just plug in the network cable and drop your code in there, and that thing's live on the internet, right? And it's just susceptible to any and all attacks, and the code itself is running on the operating system, right? Like, let's just imagine like a Windows computer. This stuff is running in. It can access every part of that server and have a lot of potential negative impacts. So how can we secure that? So the first thing is, from a networking perspective, one of the best things that you can put in front of or kind of around your infrastructure is what's called a web application firewall. This is, imagine it like a force field. It's literally just sitting there, and every bit of traffic that's coming in and out of your servers or into your application is being filtered. And it's basically looking to see, does this look sketchy? Is this from a country that we know is it's very prone to hackers, and it's not a country that we do business with? Like, let's just block it. Or we can actually analyze the traffic that's coming in to see, does this look like an attempt at SQL injection or some sort of hack? And if it senses that, it will block it. We use the Amazon Web Services web application firewall, and it's got a massive number of kind of predefined rules that filter all this stuff, and it happens in microseconds. So it doesn't have a negative impact to the performance, but it provides so much additional protection. And then there's just typical kind of checklist things that you want to make sure. Are we always encrypted in transit? So, seeing those certificates with the little green check in the browser bar, and then making sure that your data is encrypted at rest too. That means like where it's stored, is it encrypted there? And then kind of evolving from that legacy model that I mentioned, where servers were in a data center and they're just sitting there forever, and you've got to remember to go run the Windows update on them every so often. And oftentimes that means that your site goes down for a couple of hours, and you see that, hey, we're doing maintenance, we'll see you in a couple days when we get it done. That's a thing of the past, at least for us. We use what's called containerized applications, where essentially like everything is virtualized now. And without getting too much into exactly what that means, just think of it as our applications run in these little containers that are completely isolated from the operating system. We can spin them up and throw them away as we need them, and we do that constantly. And that way we can have the latest versions of all the software constantly running, and it really reduces risk. And then on the observation side, you need to know what's happening in your data center or your infrastructure at all times. I want to see every single thing that has ever happened in my application. Did a user log in? What did they do? Did they go and invite another user? Where were they coming from when they did that? And then we can start to use tools that will identify if there is something that looks shady, right? Like, is this a potential security event? And then we have to have some sort of an alerting system. So that means we need a team of on-call people. So we have folks on our team that are on call 24 hours a day. There's a call rotation. I'm on it every now and then too. And it will wake you up in the middle of the night if something is down or something looks fishy. And we go investigate it. And then from the preparedness side, what do you do when that happens? You want to make sure that you have rehearsed incident response. You have a policy, but you've actually got a plan. You've done tabletop exercises to say, hey, let's pretend we got ransomware. What are we going to do? How do we get our data back? Do we have backups of that data somewhere? What is the restore process for that? And then, of course, leveraging some sort of outside vendor to do what's called pen tests, checking to make sure that you can't be breached. So a recent case study that is pretty wild, this just happened back in August. There was a massive attack against Amazon Web Services, and I can't tell you how many services you all use that are running in AWS, probably majority of them. So what this attack was doing was it was basically just kind of spidering around in AWS accounts, in sites that were live there, trying to find something called an env file. So an env file, it's just like a static text file that is used to sometimes put in things like database passwords and API keys and things like that. So this attack was massively successful. It impacted 110,000 domains. They got 90,000 what we call environment variables. So again, these are like API keys, database passwords, that sort of thing. And they were able to actually exploit that. So how could this have been prevented? For one, these files should never end up in that place at all. They should never be shipped with your code. That was an accident. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to do. What we do is we have basically just like a process by which we're filtering out what files we take when we ship code. So pretty straightforward and very easily preventable. But let's say it wasn't in a file of that name, but somebody left it somewhere else, right? Or left a secure value somewhere else. That's where that secret detection that I mentioned can help find those things for you. But what happens if somehow it escaped all that and we still have a risk, right? That's where having the thing like the web application firewall, preventing that sort of traffic from coming to us in the first place. Having a thing called an API gateway. So this is something that is kind of another layer around your APIs that will make sure, are my users authenticated? And I can rate limit, meaning I can make sure that I don't get more than 100 requests a second. Because normally what happens with these attacks is that you have someone that is just hammering you with traffic. I mean, just literally pounding on the door trying to get in. And then if we get past all that, how do we know something's happened? You need tools like Amazon Web Services has something called Guard Duty that will alert you of stuff that looks suspicious. Using Elastic, which is our log aggregation system, constantly monitoring those logs, telling us if something looks fishy. And then, of course, having that formal incident response plan, making sure that you know how to do this, you know what to do, and you can reduce the impact of this event as much as possible. So I thought this quote was kind of funny. Matt added this one in, but the kind of high level of this is, I think, as many of us have admitted that we know people that it's happened to, it's still one of those like, but we're fine. Like, it's not going to happen to us. And honestly, I think that it's eventually going to happen to all of us, right? I can tell you we constantly see attempts of this type of behavior. I'm sure that you are as well. And there are oftentimes breaches that go unnoticed. Like, you may have already been breached and you don't know. And I'm not trying to instill fear, but I'm just saying that, having as many, and as elevated of protections that you can have is key. You want to make sure that you've got the education. And this applies obviously within your firm, but also within the vendors that you're working with. And as we talk about, this whole concept of the app stacks, right? The more vendors that you have, the more of these points of risk that you're incurring. Enrico made this analogy yesterday, right? Like with that castle, having multiple doors, we just want to be able to lock down one or as few doors as possible. So that's why Botkeeper exists, and that's why we're trying to really elevate our game and to be the best in the industry when it comes to security. So yeah, with that, thank you so much for coming. And we are happy to take questions.
Pretty much. We might have a little time for a question or two. I know we're just kind of coming up to lunch, but we got a mic in the back over there. So yeah, why don't we hit a question or two?
Okay, so that was really helpful, but we're accountants. So how do we implement this in our practice? Because now I'm scared shitless about all of the content that's in ChatGPT. So is there like a best practice document? Like, I can't just go to like ChatGPT and give them that slide that you just showed me and be like, which of these do you do? And then I had to Google SOC 2, so thanks for that nightmare. What do we do? Like, what's the next step to analyze our vendors and then to analyze our staff and then to build out these documents of best practices? Because I have a chatbot for every client that I'm now going to go delete, and I just said that publicly.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think there's a really cool thing happening right now with the federal government, and it's the NIST framework. There's a bunch out there. I mentioned ISO 27001 for international, but starting there, so go to nist.gov, and the federal government wants to help you. In fact, the USA is one of the few countries in the world without a federal bill protecting your privacy. China has one. So the problem right now is you're starting to see all these states, like California's CCPA, which is now turning into CCRA. You're starting to see a lot of these states. Virginia has one, Colorado has one, Florida has one. They're popping up everywhere, protecting your data privacy, because there is an absence of a preeminence of a federal bill. So NIST.gov, engage your local community. We engage with FBI local. We engage with Homeland Security. You know, there's free stuff out there they will give you. And then also engage with your cyber insurance company and just call them and say, hey, do you offer penetration testing, like Travis was mentioning? Do you offer a vulnerability assessment? Do you offer the lawyers? Hey, I just heard that I'm supposed to have a lawyer, that attorney-client privilege. Do you offer? Of course, the lawyer is going to be your lawyer. It's not going to be the insurance companies, but they will get you. They will say, here's our recommendations. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. I would also recommend an information security professional, whether that's in-house or out-house, external, because again, $24 trillion a year. You know, if there were answers, someone would be very rich to give you that. So because the depth, it's hard to point to one specific thing. So I hope that answers your question. I don't want to make it sound nebulous.
Yeah, and I would say just specifically to your ChatGPT question, if you go look at the pricing, there's, I think, 3 or 4 different tiers, and one of them specifically calls out, you know, once you're at this tier or beyond, we will not retrain on your data. And I think that they're pretty good about even putting now in a caveat that, like, don't put sensitive information in here because it could be retrained. Another thing that we often recommend as a best practice is to kind of censor or obscure any sensitive data. So you don't need to put the client's name in there. You can still ask a question, but don't put, you know, their specific name or, you know, whatever data points you can withhold to kind of filter it so that it's more of a generic thing. And then on the SOC 2 side, I think you said that you haven't really heard too much of that, or somebody did, but a SOC 2, you know, is essentially just that auditor looking at an organization and validating these controls. So for us, there's things like saying that we do security awareness training for our employees every year, and that we have antivirus or anti-malware running on all of our servers. So the auditors come in and validate that and make sure that it's true. So what you would want to do with your vendors is request their SOC 2 report, and then there's an auditor's opinion in there where they're basically saying, you know, given their controls, did they all perform over the course of that time frame? It's generally a year. Or were there exceptions where they didn't? So then look at the exceptions if there were. And some of them, it's like, oh, no big deal. But some of them may be things where you're not okay with that, right? And then you're technically supposed to do this every year, right? So when their latest SOC report comes out, check it again. Make sure that they're still being held up to those standards.
Yeah, and also, you are in a critical infrastructure. That's why I'm also recommending the federal government. Financial services is critical infrastructure. Medical device manufacturing, you know, electric power. So you have a lot of resources that are totally free.
We also have the safeguard rule that we have to comply with as well, which has a whole bunch of information First thing I did while you were talking was text my IT guy and say, we need an AI policy.
Love it.
His response was, do you want zero use of public AI tools? I said, for now, yes.
Would that get included in WISP? AI policies?
A WISP?
Policies, would that
You check your IT.
in a WISP?
Oh, in the NIST?
Can you explain the attorney equivalence and how that works with the IT company? I have an IT outsource company for security, but how do I combine with the attorney? If you could just repeat.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yes, thanks. Can you explain about the attorney privilege with the IT company? I do have an IT company for security, but I would like to know how to combine that with the attorney.
Yeah, so if you, there is only 25 to 50 true cybersecurity lawyers in the USA right now. There is no law school for cybersecurity. And that's from Scott Giordano, who is a cybersecurity professional, who's also a lawyer. It's well known that you're not going to get much help on the law front right now. However, when you do find one, they will have that. And they will say, here's what you can do. Here's the, again, going back to the cyber insurance, here's what we recommend. And then you build that plan out with them. Same thing when I was recommending with law enforcement. You build that plan out. So when you have an incident response, FBI already knows what you're going to do. You're going to pay the ransom at X if it's this significant. Here's what we're going to pay. FBI says, okay, cool. They're not going to recommend you do that, but they can't stop you. Even if it's to a terrorist organization, which is really wild right now with the Wassenaar Agreement, because you're not supposed to. But they want to know because they want to catch the bad guy and to save the other. Not to digress, but include that as part of a whole strategy as far as what am I going to attorney-client privilege, what am I going to incident response, what are my vendors who are now being breached more and more, 68%, a holistic approach to all this was kind of what we were trying to get at with a lot of content in here.
Yeah, and the specific call out that he made on the slide, if you were referring back to that, is when you have a third party come in and basically try to hack you, right, to do these penetration tests, and they find vulnerabilities, right? They may give you a list of 10 or 50 things. It takes a while to go through and patch all those things, right? You can't turn it down in a day or turn it over in a day. But then what happens if one of those things you haven't gotten to yet is exploited? And then someone could sue you saying you knew about that, you didn't take action enough. So that's what Matt was getting at by make those under attorney-client privilege so that when an investigation is done, they're proprietary.
Any other questions? Oh, we got to wrap it up. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
thanks so much.
I'm out here as well if any questions.